All right. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to our speakers and distinguished guests from the government, the diplomatic community, the academe, and think tanks. Welcome to our forum on navigating shifting tides, security challenges, and strategic opportunities for the Philippines, Japan, and the U.S. in the new Trump administration. I am Joyce Reyes. I am the Deputy Executive Director for External Affairs of the Stratbase Institute, and I will also be your host for today. So this event is organized by the Stratbase Institute in partnership with the Japan Foundation Manila. This is also a hybrid event. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, even though it's very, very hot outside. So thank you very much for braving the very hot Philippine weather. And we are also live now via Zoom and via Facebook Live. So thank you very much to everyone who's joining us virtually. So last January, as we all know, the US President Donald Trump returned to the White House. With the Trump administration making a comeback this 2025, we are asking, how will this affect the commitments of United States to regional security alliances with the Philippines and Japan? Will there be continuity or will there be change? Against this backdrop, coupled with escalating tensions in the West Philippine Sea and the East China Sea, opportunities for trilateral collaboration among the United States, Japan, and the Philippines are abound. The strategic importance of maintaining freedom of navigation and securing trade routes remains of utmost urgency, and the roles of the Quad and other multilateral frameworks will likewise be very fundamental. And that is why today we are gathering American, Japanese, and Filipino experts to help give us a deeper understanding of the shared security risks and opportunities for the Philippines, Japan, and the US in the context of the new Trump administration. So to deliver the opening remarks for today, join me in welcoming the Director of Japan Foundation Manila, Mr. Ben Suzuki. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Sam. Maybe we have been prepared the bigger room. I'm sorry for inconvenience from that. Warm welcome to everyone. It is a privilege to have such distinguished guests among us today. Allow me to acknowledge the presence and extend my gratitude to His Excellency Endo Kazuya, Ambassador of Japan to the Philippines, and esteemed members of the Embassy of Japan in the Philippines. I would like to also acknowledge the attendance of Ambassador Evan Garcia and Ambassador Jocelyn Garcia of the Department of the Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, and His Excellency Lai Tai Bin. Is it correct? My problem. Okay. Lai Tai Bin, Ambassador of Vietnam. To our distinguished guests from the diplomatic community, government, academic, think tank, and media, as well as those joining us online, good morning. On behalf of the Japan Foundation Manila, I'm honored to welcome you to today's international conference organized in collaboration with ADR Stratbase. This marks the second time, actually, that Japan Foundation has partnered with ADR Stratbase to hold an international forum. Exactly 1 year ago, we hosted the forum titled Triangular Cooperation for Regional Prosperity between the Philippines, India, and Japan, with Mr. Akita of Nikkei, who is also with us today. Today, we gather one more to discuss another timely topic. I don't repeat because I already explained to you. But why the Japan Foundation? Let me explain it briefly, because we are a newcomer in this kind of international arena. The Japan Foundation is a semi-governmental organization under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan that promotes cultural exchange. But one of our key missions is fostering intellectual exchange and global dialogue. This intellectual exchange or intellectual cooperation, as you may know, this concept is, we can trace back to the 1920s, which finally established UNESCO. So international intellectual cooperation has become increasingly vital, especially given the current geopolitical landscape, In other words, our wisdom is being challenged. Looking back at the significant moment in ASEAN-Japan relations, in December 2023, the Japanese government hosted the commemorative summit for the 50th years of ASEAN-Japan friendship and cooperation. In preparation for this milestone event, the Japanese government convened an expert panel to provide policy recommendations. One of the esteemed members of that panel, Dr. Kiba, is with us here today. The panel's report highlighted key insights, stating ASEAN and Japan must advance efforts in mitigating tensions for lasting stability and peace in the region, utilizing ASEAN-led architectures and coordinating the ASEAN outlook on the Pacific AOIP and a free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP. Furthermore, it emphasized the maintenance and strengthening of a free and open rules-based maritime order is a concrete challenge with very high priority for Japan-ASEAN relations, which relate to stability and peace in the whole region. Therefore, effective mutual and bilateral efforts between ASEAN and Japan are required. In response to these recommendations, the Japan Foundation was given with a mission to support the development of networks among think tanks and universities between ASEAN and Japan, and to enhance policy research. This mission is precisely why we are here today. While ASEAN-Japan and Philippine-Japan relations serves as a foundation of our discussions, we recognize that the needs for broader cooperation with the United States, India, and other like-minded countries like Vietnam in achieving a free and open Indo-Pacific. As we look ahead to the new Trump administration, we find ourselves at a critical juncture. To be honest, just a few weeks ago, I thought it might be premature to hold this forum only 2 months after the Trump administration re-establishment. But however, I believe many of you will agree that this is the perfect time. The diplomatic landscape is evolving rapidly, and we are already witnessed dramatic development in international affairs. I'm confident that today's conference will provide a valuable opportunity to delve into these issues and explore how our three nations, Japan, the US, and the Philippines, can collaborate more effectively in the new geopolitical era. Once again, thank you for your being here today. I look forward to thrilled discussion and meaningful engagements throughout this conference. Maraming salamat po. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ben Suzuki. Truly, it is the perfect time to talk about this, considering the, as you said, the evolving diplomatic and political landscape that we have right now. And we are also looking forward to a very insightful discussion this morning. But before we proceed, allow me to recognize some important people or some special people that we have with us this morning in the venue as well. Mr. Suzuki already recognized His Excellency Lai Tai Bin, Ambassador of the Embassy of Vietnam. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Also with us today from the military, we have the spokesperson of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Colonel Francel Taborlupa. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. Also, the lead information support for territorial defense operations of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Colonel Joar Herrera. Welcome, sir. Also, the Chief of Public Affairs of the AFP, Colonel Enrico Ileto. Thank you, sir. Former spokesperson and Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Major General Restituto Padilla. Deputy Commander of Coast Guard Security and Border Protection Force, Commander Eliseo Mortillero. And also the Chief of the Office for Strategic Studies and Strategy Management, Brigadier General Joel Paloma. Okay. And also from the government, we have with us today the Assistant Secretary of the Office of American Affairs of the DFA, ASEC J.V. Chan. And also with us, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of American Affairs of the DFA, Deputy ASEC Maria Corina Reyes. And of course, we have with us today former Ambassador Evan Garcia. So thank you very much for joining us today. So to deliver a special message, it is an honor to have with us today the Ambassador of the Embassy of Japan to the Philippines, His Excellency Endo Kazuya. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
I should also be starting with addressing the Professor Victor Dinamahit, Stratbase Institute President, Professor Renato de Castro, Stratbase Institute Trustee and Program Convener, Mr. Hiroyuki Akita, Commentator, Nikkei Shimbun, and other discussants, Mr. Ben Suzuki, Japan Foundation Manila Director, esteemed guests, colleagues from the Diplomatic Corps, and friends. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat po for your warm introduction. I'd first like to extend my deep appreciation to our host, the Stratbase ADR Institute, for tirelessly organizing these in-depth dialogues. Thank you also for today's arrangement, which makes this room even more filled with energy for discussions. And thank you also for arranging this very beautiful hot weather, which makes Manila really Manila. It is a privilege to be welcomed back by such an enlightened company joining us today, both virtually and in person. Breaking new grounds in cooperation, Japan-Philippine relations have entered the golden age with renewed closeness. From subway construction to reciprocal access agreement, our ties have grown from strength to strength, strategically embracing realities toward mutual prosperity. Now, as was mentioned, as the second Trump administration has been forming its foreign policy, it is exactly a good time to discuss how we can further strengthen the cooperation between like-minded countries such as Japan, the Philippines, and the United States. We have long had strong foundations for our strategic trilateral cooperations, as both the Philippines and Japan are treaty allies to the United States, as we all share similar security challenges in this region. The formal institutionalization of trilateral cooperation developed rapidly in the last few years and April last year. So our historic trilateral summit laying a firm foundation for our recent collaborations among the three nations. Our trilateral is a very meaningful framework toward the realization of a free and open Indo-Pacific. While time does not allow listing all subsequent developments, let me highlight a few key achievements. In the realm of maritime security, the first ever Japan-Philippines-US maritime dialogue held in Tokyo last December was a significant step forward. Our on-ground cooperation is equally vigorous. Japan and the US have provided maritime safety expertise to support the Philippine Coast Guard under the Sapphire Initiative. Also in February this year, just last month, the 6th Maritime Cooperative Activity drills along Japan, the US, Australia, and the Philippine navies bolstered our collective capacities for regional stability. Japan-Philippine Reciprocal Access Agreement, of course, lays the foundation for further enhancing the interoperability of our forces. We have also made significant strides in trilateral economic collaboration. Last October, the Japan-Philippines-US trilateral discussion on economic resilience marked a pivotal moment to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to fostering economic resilience. Our cooperation in the field of ICT, including Open Radio Access Network, has also advanced. Last month, I had the honor to sign a diplomatic note with Secretary Manalo to provide Open RAN related equipment to the Philippines, which is a foundation for economic security. Immediately after the inauguration of the new US administration, the Japan-US Foreign Ministers meeting reaffirmed the importance of strengthening cooperation with like-minded countries, including the trilateral cooperation with the Philippines. I'm pleased to hear that Secretary Manalo also spoke with the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and noted the role of the trilateral cooperation with Japan, not only in reinforcing regional security, but also in efforts to build stable supply chains in vital sectors and increase private investments. Last month, Prime Minister Ishiba of Japan visited Washington, D.C. and held the first in-person meeting with President Trump. The leaders' joint statement reaffirmed our strong opposition to the unlawful maritime claims, to militarization of reclaimed features, and to threatening and provocative activities in the South China Sea. It is also encouraging that the two leaders of Japan and the US agreed to advance cooperation among like-minded countries, including the trilateral collaborations with the Philippines. Those recent dialogues epitomize the determination of Japan. We communicate with the new US administration from the perspective that constructive US engagement in the region is in the vital interest of the US itself. We continue our humble efforts while closely communicating with the Filipino friends, including our foreign minister's visit to Manila in January and that of our defense minister in February. Having recognized this landscape surrounding the Japan-Philippines-US partnership, it is crucial that we approach the future with foresight and collaboration. I look forward to insightful discussions from the experts of our three nations today. With our esteemed speakers and friends, I'm confident that today's dialogues will be fruitful and will help us navigate the evolving political landscape together. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay ang ating pagkakaibigan. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Endo Kazuya. Sir, if we may invite you for a quick photo opportunity, all right, with Professor Manhit and also Mr. Ben Suzuki, please. All right, thank you very much again, Ambassador Endo. So we will now proceed to our esteemed speakers for this morning. Our discussion for today will examine the shifting U.S. strategic priorities in the Indo-Pacific. Our experts will compare past Trump-era policies with potential Trump 2.0 directions. They will also assess the impact on regional security alliances, particularly for the Philippines and Japan, and explore opportunities for strengthening trilateral cooperation with the U.S. amid evolving multilateral dynamics, including ASEAN and the Quad. We are privileged to have with us today an esteemed panel of speakers, starting with a Senior Fellow and Director of the Southeast Asia Program and Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us live all the way from Washington, D.C., let us all welcome Mr. Gregory Poling.
Good morning, everybody. Hi. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I was just in Manila some 3 weeks ago, and my wife only allows me one trip to the Philippines a month. So, nonetheless, it's a real pleasure. I will admit at the top that things in Washington are moving very quickly. So, happy to answer any questions after the presentation. I don't have all the answers here. Neither does anybody else in Washington, even those I suspect in the U.S. government. Let me start my remarks with the U.S.-Philippine alliance, because I do think that if we're looking at any potential U.S. partners or allies across the world who have reason to be optimistic about their partnership with the Trump administration, it is the Philippines. And Japan should be pretty happy as well after the Prime Minister's recent visit, but I'll get to that in a moment. In the case of the Philippines, the U.S. government, after instituting its freeze on foreign assistance, which included security assistance, has so far only issued waivers for that assistance, so unlocked the funding for 3 countries now, and those are Ukraine, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Ukraine's is now frozen again. So the Philippines is the only country in Asia that explicitly had its military assistance unlocked as a result of Secretary Manalo's meetings with Secretary Rubio. That's a pretty good sign. It means that there's a recognition within the U.S. Department of State and Department of Defense that the military alliance and the U.S. capacity building assistance to the armed forces of the Philippines is a critical national interest, one that can't wait for whatever process is ongoing right now to try to rationalize U.S. foreign assistance. We've also seen the Philippines receive far more attention than any other party in Southeast Asia when it comes to cabinet level engagements. When the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was confirmed, his first meeting was with the Quad partners, including his Japanese counterpart, but his first call with any Southeast Asian leader was to Secretary Manalo. They met again in Munich. The same is true of Secretary Teodoro and Secretary Hegseth. Secretary Teodoro was in Washington, met with our new National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, and then Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's first phone call with any Southeast Asian leader was to Secretary Teodoro. So this tells us that the administration is committed to putting the time and the energy into developing these relationships. That is particularly important given the relative lack of interest that the administration has so far shown to the rest of Southeast Asia. There is a bit of attention being given right now to Vietnam and Indonesia. And there have been a couple of calls with Singapore, one with Thailand. But overall, the administration has shown a marked lack of interest at this stage in Southeast Asia, which means that the Philippines, by getting so much attention, both funding and high-level attention, is being, singled out as a partner and an ally, not as part of a Southeast Asia strategy, but for its unique relationship with the U.S. bilaterally. And that is far more likely to see the alliance through the next 4 years than any, sense of U.S. Southeast Asia strategy. I don't think that the Trump administration, Trump 2.0, is going to have a Southeast Asia strategy. Their engagements are going to be bilateral, or they're going to focus on preferred minilaterals like the Quad, or perhaps like the US, Japan, Philippines trilateral. We have seen almost no attention to ASEAN. Malaysia, as ASEAN chair, has received no phone calls or visits at the cabinet level. And there doesn't seem to be much interest from either party, Washington or Kuala Lumpur, to reach out, suggesting that the organization of ASEAN is not going to receive nearly as much attention from this administration as it did under President Biden, or even as it did under the first Trump administration. The second thing I'd like to talk about is Japan, because Prime Minister Ishiba got the first early in-person meeting with President Trump. By all accounts, it went remarkably well, better than expected. I won't go into all the details. Others like Jimbo-san, who will speak next, are better qualified. But much like the Philippines, President Trump and his cabinet seem to be predisposed to a positive relationship with Japan, which is very good because much of this, especially at this early stage, is quite personal. We see the president ill-disposed toward European allies, ill-disposed toward Canada and Mexico, but quite positively disposed toward both Japan and the Philippines, as well as toward Australia, I'll note, which has had very positive engagements, including public statements of support from the president on AUKUS. So while I worry a great deal, and I think much of Washington is worried about the staying power of the U.S. commitment in Europe, so far, the Trump administration's early signs on our key allies in Asia are extremely positive. Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. South Korea is a bit more difficult, partially because of the political turmoil in South Korea at the moment. But I'm cautiously optimistic at this point that the administration will remain engaged and that we'll see more continuity than not with Biden administration policies, at least on the military alliance. Economics could be a different ballgame, both when it comes to U.S. development assistance and trade and investment policies. I'll also note that on the specific issues of the South China Sea and the East China Sea, we've heard positive signs. We've had explicit statements from the administration that the Senkaku Islands are covered by the U.S.-Japan Mutual Defense Treaty. And then just last Monday, after the latest incident over Scarborough Shoal, or Bajo de Masinloc, in which a Chinese aircraft dangerously intercepted a Philippine aircraft, the U.S. Department of State issued a press release that reiterated explicitly that Article 5 of the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty covers any attack on Filipino public vessels, armed forces, or aircraft in the South China Sea. And it explicitly added including Philippine Coast Guard, which is important because that's a line that was added to those statements by the Biden administration. So I think it's very reassuring to see it now reiterated by the Trump administration. There was a little bit of worry because that language about the treaty had not been included in the readouts from the early phone calls between Secretary Rubio and Manalo, or Secretary Hegseth and Teodoro, but we now have it on the record. Okay, happy to answer more questions if there are any on the specifics of the alliance and policy as it stands right now. I would like to point out the broader context here. As I said, the administration is clearly not well disposed at the moment toward the U.S.'s allies in Europe or toward Ukraine. I'm sure everybody in the room, as almost everybody in the world did, saw the fireworks from President Trump and President Zelensky's meetings, and has been following the more recent developments this week, the U.S. Canceling military deliveries to Ukraine and canceling intelligence sharing. This speaks to, I think, the underlying concern that all parties have to have right now, that this is an administration that is going to approach relationships very transactionally, with a degree of capriciousness and unpredictability. And we already knew that. I mean, everybody says that about the first Trump administration. But I think we have to appreciate that this second Trump administration is even more likely to break with long-standing U.S. norms. It is not going to have the same deep normative commitment to the rules-based order as it's existed for the last 80 years. And so while I think the U.S.-Philippine alliance is in pretty good shape and will be in pretty good shape, it does behoove all U.S. allies and partners to seek a diversification of their relations in order to backstop any potential U.S. disinterest or distraction over the next few years. And I want to be careful here because the U.S.-Philippine alliance is not between a single president and the Philippines. It is between the government of the Philippines and the government of the United States, backed up by the support of both legislatures. So I don't think the alliance is going anywhere no matter what happens. But as the Philippines has already been doing, diversifying its security relations, making itself more deeply embedded in a regional security architecture with Japan via the reciprocal access agreement inked last year, with Australia, with the coming SOFAs with Canada and New Zealand, and probably with the SOFAs to follow with France, Germany, and the UK, is to the good of the Philippines. It gives it options. It means that if the US does become distracted or unpredictable in the short term, the Philippines has options to in a sense, wait it out. Much of this is also still uncertain because while it does feel like a great deal has happened in Washington, and a great deal has happened in Washington, we have to remember we are only 6 weeks into this administration. Most of the relevant officials who will lead policy on Asia are not even in place yet. We do not have assistant secretaries of state or defense for Asia. We still have factions within the new Trump administration that have very different policy prescriptions. We have the traditional China hawks. We have the more isolationist wing of the party. And it is still, I think, quite uncertain on any given issue who is going to win those arguments more often than not. So I would caution everybody to adopt a degree of humility when we make assumptions this early in the administration of what will or will not happen. And to that point, the most important thing that the Philippines or any other partner can be doing to shore up the resiliency of their partnership and alliance is to lean on the U.S. Congress. Of course, the U.S. does have a very powerful imperial presidency when it comes to foreign policy, but things like the treaty, the appropriation of military support, all of this runs through the Congress. And the Philippines has deep and broad support within the U.S. Congress. Something that will, I think, see the alliance through the next few years and ensure that, at least on the funding side, there will be a degree of predictability as we get into things like the next National Defense Authorization Act later in the year. I know I didn't answer as many questions as people might have hoped. Again, I don't have all the answers, and neither do most folks in Washington, but I would welcome your questions. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Greg. So Greg will not be able to join us later in the open forum, but we have time right now for some reactions, perhaps, or questions for Mr. Poling. Maybe we can ask we have our speakers here to react on the presentation or on the speech of Mr. Poling. Yes, Dr. Renato de Castro.
Good morning, Greg. This is Renato. How are you doing? I was hoping to see you, but it seems that you have other plans of staying there. So I have two questions. Number one, I have the same observation you have regarding the fact that you have turmoil in NATO and other U.S. alliances in Europe. And of course, again, you have to emphasize Ukraine is not a U.S. treaty ally. You know, it's a case of a country that has aligned its interests with the United States in the face of the Russia-Ukraine war. But again, you have stability, relative stability here in the Indo-Pacific region, specifically with the Philippines, U.S., U.S.-Japan, in a certain degree, US Australia. Is it simply a matter of personal preference of the president, or there's a grand design behind this? Is there a scheme regarding this? I cannot help but think back what happened, of course, during the Cold War with the sudden shift of the Nixon administration, Kissinger, during that time. You know, basically trying to separate the Soviet Union from the People's Republic of China. I cannot help but to look back in terms of what happened in the past. Second point regarding the conversation between Secretary Hegseth and SND, Teodoro, when he did not mention the term ironclad, instead Secretary Hegseth used the term deterrence. This is the first time that we heard the use of deterrence in terms of the Philippine-US alliance. What's the indication or significance of the fact that the alliance, Philippine-US alliance, is now being seen not anymore in terms of ironclad commitment on the part of Washington, but in terms of deterrence by both parties against China?
Thank you, Renato. And yeah, very sorry I'm not there. I do expect to be back in May at the latest, so hopefully we can catch up then. So on Europe, I think based on President Trump's and then private citizen Trump statements going all the way back to the 90s, there is a certain amount of this that is just personal. He has a certain dislike for at least some U.S. partners in Europe and Canada, but he also has a long-standing, well-documented belief that European partners take advantage of the United States, are not paying their fair share, as he sees it, for their defense. This is why you've heard, as recently as the last 24 hours, again, this restatement that he believes U.S. Commitments under Article 5 of NATO need not apply unless countries are meeting a certain level threshold of spending on their militaries. I think now 5% of GDP. So I think most of this has very little to do with any kind of grand strategy vis-a-vis China or Russia. Now, that said, there are people within the president's orbit who I think are trying to make an ex post facto rationalization of this. And they do talk about efforts to potentially strike a grand bargain with Russia in order to peel Moscow from Beijing. Some people call this the reverse Kissinger. I don't think it holds a lot of water. I don't think there are many who think that it's a sound strategic idea here in Washington. Today's Beijing-Moscow relationship is much closer than at any point in the last, 60 years. Kissinger and then Nixon were only able to go to Beijing because you had already had the Sino-Soviet split. China and Russia had already fought a war before the U.S. normalized. The U.S. didn't split China from the Soviet Union. It took advantage of a split that already existed, which is the exact opposite of what we see today with the increasingly tight alignment of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And I don't think there's anything the U.S. is going to do to separate those powers from each other. Most of Washington doesn't think that either. On the specific language used by Secretary Hegseth, I would not read too much into it because I tend to view the language used by the State Department as the one that we should take as our guidance when it comes to U.S. official position. Secretary Rubio did use ironclad in both readouts with Secretary Manalo, first from the phone call on day one and then from the meeting in Munich. And more importantly, we had the statement on the South China Sea last Monday that specifically reiterated the Mutual Defense Treaty language. I would suspect that Secretary Hegseth's language with Secretary Teodoro was more the reflection of a secretary new to the job, who has not had much experience with the region.
All right, thank you very much, Greg. Do we have any more reactions or questions, maybe from our Japanese experts? Do you have questions that you want to ask? Okay, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Hiro Akita from Nikkei. Thank you. So actually, I visited Washington last month, and my impression is that the myth that when US will pull out of Europe, it may mean that US will shift its military commitment to Asia. That is not necessarily given. Maybe people like Rubio or Waltz may think that way, or Elbridge Colby may think that way, but there are huge MAGA people in the White House who wants to pursue neo-Monroe doctrine. So for them, maybe they are not interested in expanding military commitment neither to Europe and in the Pacific. So which do you think is prevail in the math, or in the Trump's brain? Thank you.
Thank you, Akita-san. Look, if I knew what was happening in President Trump's brain, I suspect I would be far better compensated than I am today. But I do agree with you that it is wishful thinking to assume that just because the administration wants to decrease U.S. commitments to Europe, it therefore follows that they will increase it in the Indo-Pacific. Perhaps that's what Secretary Rubio would like. Perhaps that's what NSA Waltz would like. Perhaps that's what soon-to-be confirmed Undersecretary of Defense Bridge Colby would like. But as you point out, there are just as many people in the administration who would like the opposite, who would like the U.S. to pull back on its commitments across the board, or at the very least hold them firm in Asia and pull back from Europe and the Middle East. So, look, I would be somewhat surprised if we saw any real increased U.S. security footprint in the Indo-Pacific. I'm more optimistic that what we will just see is a continuation of the trends already in place at the end of the Biden administration. But I do think, again, that it behooves all U.S. allies and partners, including Japan and the Philippines, to seek closer ties with each other and with European partners in the interim, just in case the J.D. Vances of the administration prevail, at least temporarily, and you do see diminished U.S. commitment.
All right. Thank you, Greg. I also have a question, if I can ask a question as well. What do you think are key opportunities or low-hanging fruits that will or should the U.S., Japan, and Philippines trilateral prioritize this year?
Very good question. A couple things that jump to mind. One, I think this is the year to really operationalize trilateral training and exercises with the Japan, Philippines RAA accomplished. So that can start with more high-tempo Japanese participation by the SDF in Balikatan, but should expand to other exercises, both on land and at sea. Potentially also including the Australians. So we see a more sophisticated trilateral and quadrilateral pace of military exercising. Second, on the economic front, we have not heard really anything from the Trump administration about the future of the Luzon Economic Corridor. But I think early signals from both the U.S. and Japan that they remain committed to that, even if we're going to see a shift in some of the U.S. focus, particularly on renewable energy, would be key. And perhaps the most valuable component of that remains the redevelopment of Subic Bay. I think that's a clear value proposition that the Trump administration would embrace, and that would be beneficial to all three parties.
Thank you very much, Greg. We won't take up much of your time anymore. I know it's already almost 10 in the evening there in Washington, D.C. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gregory Poling. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Greg. Now allow me to introduce our second speaker for this morning. Our second speaker is a professor of international relations from the Keio University in Japan. He is also the manager director of programs from the International House of Japan. He is also joining us live via Zoom, this time all the way from Tokyo, Japan. Let us all welcome Dr. Ken Jimbo. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
I'd like to begin by thanking my Filipino friends, ADRI and Embassy of Japan, Japan Foundation in the Philippines to co-organizing this event. And I'd just like to say To Greg, hello, before he leaves here. I know it's midnight in Washington, D.C., so you have a pre-choice to, leave anytime. But I would like to really echo what Greg has laid out in the current dynamics of the Washington, D.C. politics. And when I first prepared for this discussion, my original intention was to emphasize the how continuity takes place in the Indo-Pacific rather than the change in the U.S. Security commitments anywhere else, anywhere in the world. But so even among so-called prioritizers like Bridge Colby, it's already been mentioned, the consensus view in the Washington seems to be that Indo-Pacific remains to be the most consequential region. Whenever you try to ask with the so-called strategic mindset people among those Trump administration in the White House, and sometimes they refer to that is far more critical than Europe or in the Middle East. Given this perspective, I was prepared to highlight how rigid and reliable the U.S. alliance remains for Japan, South Korea, and also for the Philippines, despite broader geopolitical disruptions. I would say since the inauguration of the Trump administration. It's already only 6 weeks, but it's been a quite overwhelming period of time that whenever we wake up in the morning, we are having a lot of tremendously surprising news that really have the broader implications. Given this perspective, I will try to re-investigate it. That especially that the events that took place last week and a couple of days, and what we witnessed in Washington D.C. Is the public humiliation of the President Zelensky at the Oval Office, the apparent shift in the U.S. policy to align with Russia's condition for the ceasefire, and the somewhat outsourcing Ukraine's security guarantee entirely to Europe, and which United States once again said that there's no intention to send any troops to Ukraine. And when they were asked about what about the security guarantee, and it's all about the mineral deals, and if the U.S. Private sector people will be in Ukraine, and that is a shadow, that is a symbol, that Russia will be regarded as a trigger, so that Russia will never do those re-invasion to Ukraine, with the conviction that that's a deal made between President Trump and President Putin. And I think those kind of configuration have fundamentally shaken my confidence in the U.S. commitments beyond those immediate interests. And at the same time, the United States is prioritizing economic deals, particularly on those mineral agreements, and and over those strategic security obligations, and signaling that alliance is also the part of those transactional politics, rather than based on those institutions and traditional values that we have long committed with each other. So that raises an unavoidable question, even for us in Asia, and how can we be sure that what happened to Ukraine will not happen in East Asia? So I think that the Prime Minister Kishida's famous terminologies, when he said that today's Ukraine could be East Asia tomorrow, and that is in the context that all the kind of deterrence structure, how deterrence failed in Ukraine, and that has a strong implication over how it takes place in a major spotlight of the conflicts in East Asia. So we really have to see as a consequential interconnectivity between the two theaters, and that really trigger the Japanese government's commitment to NATO as a IP4 members, and asking NATO's to commit to Indo-Pacific theater in terms of the both regions are connected with each other. But now we have to regard this concept as how Trump tried to deal with Ukraine, with Russia over Ukraine, could also happen in East Asia. And how can you say that we are so different? What is take place in Europe wouldn't really take place in Indo-Pacific because we are in this different region. And I think that's also emergingly become a naive idea when we think about the fundamental kind of characterization of how transactional that the Trump administration might look like and how it take place in detail. For example, the pursuit of the deal with China or North Korea chooses in return for choosing of the scale back U.S. commitment to Taiwan or the Korean Peninsula. And what if the United States signaled to its allies in Japan, South Korea, and Philippines that it is now their responsibility to handle regional security on their own? Once that the deal is made, and that's now your turn to take rest of responsibility, and that could be also mentioned to Taiwan. When the Kobe mentioned about you have to spend 10%, and that's really absurd. From the Kobe's theory, that is really rational, but and that really indicates that once that the Taiwan step up on its defense, and probably the next day the Trump administration will ask Taiwan to do your own. And so these kind of I think strong implication must be acknowledged to become one of the most like a formidable scenario that we really need to prepare for the years to come. But I guess that as Greg laid out, I think the initial phase of Trump administration's looking at Asia, seems to be more emphasizing on the continuity rather than the major changes. And I was really glad to see that on next day of the inauguration that the Quad foreign ministers meeting was convened immediately after. And that also signaled the major continued Indo-Pacific engagement by the Trump administration. And also that, as Greg also pointed out, that following U.S.-Japan summit meeting between Trump and Ishiba also reiterated the continuity of the strategic asset that we have cultivated over past years. There's an important list that we really need to go through for the commitment of the Senkaku application of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, Article 5 on that part, and then the seamless commitment that we have laid out since the 2015 U.S.-Japan Defense Cooperation Guideline. That is a very important concept. And then, above all, I think that Trump administration is to commit to the peaceful strengths throughout those Indo-Pacific region. And that's a very kind of strong terminology that the United States prioritize this region, and the United States commitment to the region remains to be intact. So it's lots of assurance message that took place in the context of the U.S.-Japan summit meeting, and we were very happy about that. And but again, you can say that how much that the president really seriously take into account of those detailed aspects of the alliance management, rather than the tone of what the text can really prevail in understanding of the current state of the U.S.-Japan alliance. So it's a kind of two different dynamics has been taking place. And on the case of Philippines, I think Greg had already laid out very important milestones of the how it has been carefully crafted to convince the continuity of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. And then as for the U.S.-Japan-Philippine trilateral framework, that remained intact with ongoing mill-to-mill cooperation, joint patrols, and minis. And also that if, listening to the Bridge Colby's confirmation hearing that took a long hours, but I think he reiterated the prioritizers, own point of view, how important the Indo-Pacific is, and to reallocate those resources of the U.S. military and budget to the Indo-Pacific. That all encourages the importance of the U.S. commitment to this region. So again, has already been raised by Akita-san in conversation with Greg and also Renato, that how genuine of these trends may really be structurized as reassuring kind of elements of the U.S. Relation with these allies in the region. But when could be the time that the next phase of those transactional politics in the U.S.-China relations and U.S.-North Korea relationship might take place at the expense of the traditional commitment of the alliance? And that's, I think, necessarily the case that we also need to carefully take notes. Why I'm concerned about the Ukraine is first of all, because there has been the fundamental, I think, a turnaround about the U.S. Commitment on the security of the Ukraine, assisting Ukraine, and encouraging the G7 cohesiveness to go against Russia. And now what the White House has been doing, as you are aware, is a direct negotiation with the Putin. And by listening carefully to what the President Trump has been saying, is the ending the war needs the serious deal, and serious needs has to be done with a Putin. And if Putin doesn't agree, there will be no deal. So that naturally this logic leads to the proposal of the agreement based on the Russians' preferential arrangements, and that might entail the Istanbul agreements like arrangements in 2022, asking the Ukraine to disbandle the current level of the force posture and the readiness to fight against Russians. And probably they may agree on the ceasefire, but Russia may ask to all the foreign forces, Ukraine forces, to get out of those Donbass, 2 states in the east, 2 states in the south. And then will be very cautionary remarks on any foreign forces, which now Europeans are asking, proposing to organize the peace keeping forces to be deployed in the Ukraine. And that might be a very partial kind of way to demonstrate the triggering effect of the deterrence, not for dissuading Russia to re-invade Ukraine. And those kind of escalation control matters a lot, because if United States declare there will be no troops on the ground again, and whether Europeans can really replace the role of the deterrence, and to my understanding, that is very limited. If that is the kind of configuration that took place and the United States thinks that that is the right way to go forward, again, coming back to Taiwan, coming back to Korean Peninsula, coming back to South China Sea, what will be the emerging context that they need to have is the critical question that I need to mention about it. And so I'd like to finish by mentioning about South China Sea and the Japan-Philippine cooperation, because I'm talking from Tokyo. I think that the basic line of my argument is we really need to think about the hedging against the U.S. uncertainty in committing to the defense of Philippines and commitment to the South China Sea. So the South China Sea definitely is now the front line of the regional security cooperation, and the strategic relationship between Japan and Philippines has deepened significantly in recent years, and that's already been outlined by Ambassador Endo. And for Japan, Philippines is a critical strategic partner, and due to geographical position along the key sea lanes such as the South China Sea and the Luzon Strait, and both essential for Japan's economic and energy security. So Japanese commitment to the defense of the Philippines, security of surrounding areas of Philippines is a critical, I think, national interest for Japan. So we are committing in a real sense. But given that the current uncertainty that I laid out, I think there's a specific items that we really need to move it forward. I think that, as Greg has already mentioned, expanding the joint military training and defense technology transfers and enhanced maritime security and coastal defense capability, those are the things definitely need to move things forward. Whatever that the summit or ministerial meetings could take place or not, those are already based on agreements, and we really need to institutionally move things forward. And I think we also need to increase the trilateral naval patrols with the U.S. to counter gray zone threats and improve deterrence in the West Philippine seas. And the operational tempo and the frequency of the military exercise and the presence operation needs to be maintained. I don't want to see the dramatic decrease of such kind of dispatchment of the forces, and we need to keep the tempo and then not to open the door, open the window of the opportunity for China to take the adventurous steps because of the level of the commitments may be different. And the strengthening of the maritime domain awareness by the further enhancing coastal radar system, intelligence sharing frameworks to detect and respond to the maritime incursion, and that needs to be effectively operated. And I think, again, that we don't want to see the vacuum of the operation because of the political change that took place in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, and then that those kind of practical physical presence become even more important than ever. And as Greg mentioned, that the institutionalizing of the reciprocal access agreements between Japan and the Philippines, that needs to ensure the seamless military coordination between Japan and Philippines, especially in terms of the upgrading of the military exercises. And those are, I think, a very important framework to be provided. And finally, I think that we are now, many of the Filipino friends have been aware that developed a new budget item called the Official Security Assistance. And we started small, but we are now expanding the portfolio of the assistance, and the end user can be the military partners. And we are also, incorporating from the outset that the Philippines is the major destination of the OSA, especially in terms of the FPS-free anti-air radar system in the Philippines. But my personal take is that we have to dramatically increase the scale of the OSA, not only for the equipment itself, but I think that the more important is the infrastructures, especially how you can really connect through those in the security-related infrastructure like EDCA sites, and also the many of the airports, ports, and the connectivity projects, ship repairing functions, and those are, I think, that the key, I think, a convergence where United States, Philippines, and Japan can really work together to enhance the level of cooperation and enhance the the U.S. commitments. And also that eventually turn to the effect to the deterrence structure in the collective sense. So I will stop here and look forward to having a discussion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Ken Jimbo. That was a very comprehensive discussion from Ukraine, which I believe many of us share the same thought or concern when we saw that interaction between President Trump and President Zelensky, and then to the bilateral between the Philippines and the Japan. And I'm sure many of us, or there are some of us here who want to ask follow-up questions to Dr. Jimbo. He will be joining us again later during the open forum, so save your questions. Maybe you can ask that to him later. All right, now we proceed to our next speaker. He is a commentator from Nikkei, one of the biggest Japanese news organizations in the world. Let us all welcome Akita. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Thank you for having me. I've always believed that the role of academic is to present very orthodox view, and the role of journalist is to provoke. But since Jimbo-san already have been provoking our discussion, unlike a very, very prominent academic, Jimbo-san, and also he's very good at speak very fast and put a lot of content. So please let me differentiate and speak a little bit slower, try to provoke even more. Yeah, so as I said, I visited Washington last month and met about more than about a dozen people, about 15 people, to understand the essence of Trump administration. And I'd like to share with you, by the way, in Washington, temperature was -3 or 4 centigrade, and also political climate is much more chilly, so I feel much safer being here. So anyway, three perspectives that I want to share with you. First is about the essence of Trump diplomacy. And second is about the power structure inside the Trump administration as of today. And third is about what will it mean to Trump approach to China and other great powers. So first is the essence of Trump administration. There is myth, which I was used to believe, that is Trump diplomacy is deal approach, making a deal or transactional. But now I believe that it is wrong. It is even worse. So deal is that Trump administration will adopt deal diplomacy only to big power, like Russia and China, maybe potentially India or Saudi or Turkey. So for those big countries, which have some kind of cards to play with. But for the small country, maybe they will, not maybe, they are adopting so-called predatory diplomacy. Because there's nothing to deal, so just take. That is a case in Panama and also Greenland and potentially Canada. Maybe there are many people who listened to his speech at Congress last week. When he mentioned about Greenland, he said, I will get it, get. And when he mentioned about Panama Canal, he said, we will take it, take. Get and take are not the vocabulary for the bargaining, but it is to take. So he didn't say that I will pay money to purchase Greenland or Panama. So that is a kind of like a predatory aspect of his diplomacy. I'm sorry to say that. But the good news is that predatory diplomacy will not be applied to everywhere in the world, I think. It will be mainly applied to a West Hemisphere. Greenland, Canada, Panama, and potentially some of the important port in Latin America. So it is kind of like a neo-Mongol doctrine rather than neo-Yalta diplomacy. There is an element of Yalta diplomacy, but I would say it is a resurgence of neo-Mongol doctrine. And the rest of other country, maybe if he has appetite, like Gaza, maybe he tried to take it. But if maybe South China Sea or some other part of the world, maybe he doesn't care. Maybe he will not take. He just leave it. So this is my first intellectual provocation for an interesting discussion. And then second, power structure. Also, there was a myth that I tend to believe before I went to Washington. That is, inside the Trump administration, there are maybe, let's say, 4 factions. One is MAGA factions, led by Vance, Vice President Vance, and on the other side of the spectrum, there is people like Rubio or Waltz, who are China hawk, or maybe to some extent primacist. And then in between, there's people like Elbridge Colby, who wants to pull out of Europe and then shift to Asia. Then on the top of that, there is a rich guy, Elon Musk. So myth is that all those factions compete each other within the administration and then formulate some kind of a consensus, which Trump will make a decision. But I think my instinct is that is not the case at all. There aren't any factions, but there are loose coalition of cabinet members or advisors, but it is not faction. They are not so united. So in other words, Trump administration is like a galaxy. There is only one sun. And then there are many planets who are going around the sun. They are coalition, like a small universe. They are universe, but they are not faction. So if this is their structure, we do not count on people like Rubio or Waltz to stop what the Trump tried to do. If they kind of like if they try to persuade Trump, maybe sometime they may succeed. But if they fail, maybe this planet will be just thrown out or purged to a black hole of the space. So what they are doing right now is to survive. They are making a speech or comment or tweet to that please Trump. So Munich Security Conference's Vice President Vance's speech was very typical case. He was not trying to reach out. He didn't try to reach out to European audience, but he tried to reach out Trump to attract his ear so that he will more inclined to listen to Vance's proposal. So we shouldn't take each cabinet members or advisors' speech as it is. Sometimes, of course, they are making a serious policy speech, of course, for sure, but there is element of their tactic to survive in this galaxy. So that is the second finding, which is very gloomy. Then last point is about what it will mean. So if Trump administration will remain as a galaxy, we really have to pay attention to the intention of the sun, what he will do. And if I'm a Trump, I want to be remembered as, so this part is my speculation. If I'm a Trump, I want to be remembered as a great leader who made a great deal and also who satisfied Trump supporters. So if some of the planet, so when I look at the planet going around me and then make a decision out of several options, I'm inclined to choose MAGA coalition's advice rather than Rubio or Waltz, unless Rubio or Waltz's advices would be really necessary advice to make America great again. So if there were to be a war of conflict in Taiwan Strait or South China Sea, and if Trump really believed that if US wouldn't do anything, maybe it will make US really less great. If he would be persuaded by Rubio or Waltz, maybe he will do so. And also MAGA will be happy to help. But just telling Trump that, oh, it is very necessary for the stability in the region, and it is an interest for US to maintain the peace in the Pacific because of the commerce or something like that, I don't think that will work. So for us, Japan and the Philippines, or everybody, lastly, important tactics and approach to Trump is to propose whatever policies proposal in the flame of make America great again. So phrase is, I will really support women's Philippines or US, Japan, US allies are really willing to make US great again. And also we also want to be greater with US. And we are willing to help. And we don't want you to fail. So let's cooperate. This is a kind of like, it takes time to make this logic, but the patience, but I think this is the best way to approach to Trump. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Hiroyuki Akita. Very interesting discussion, sir. Very thought-provoking. I'm sure many of our participants here also have follow-up questions that they want to address to you later on during our open forum. All right, but for now, we proceed to our next speaker. He is a professor from the International Studies Department of the De La Salle University in Manila. He is also a trustee and program convener of the Stratbase Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Dr. Renato De Castro.
You have a PowerPoint presentation. My task is basically to present what I think would be a very important partnership given the fact that you have dramatic changes, and that's of course looking at what I call the trilateral security partnership, just to assess it. And of course, if we often look at the triangle, we see three sides, but I would emphasize the base of this triangle, because if you have any changes in this triangle, the one that would keep that trilateral relationship will be the base. And let's analyze the base. Okay, let me just start. First slide, please. I'll try to be fast. Of course, this is a concept that emerged in the early 21st century, the notion of trilateral. What do you mean by trilateral? Big international organizations like the UN, ASEAN are kind of very bulky. So you talk about countries that will have to move away from simply bilateral to trilateral. Of course, the first administration, U.S. administration that adopted it, interestingly, was the Trump administration. Okay, next slide. So the agendas of multilateral are usually less extensive than usually pursued by the full-fledged cooperative security. They're likely to become inclusive multilateral. So the first effort for a minilateral, of course, began during the Trump administration. And it happened here in Manila, 2017, where you have, of course, the revival of the quadrilateral security dialogue, Quad. I remember when this was convened here in Manila, the Department of Foreign Affairs then was kind of clueless. Why did President Trump, the Prime Minister of Australia, the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and of course Modi met in a room in the Philippine International Convention Center? This was around November 2017. So interestingly, despite notion of being unilateralist, it was a Trump administration that actually experimented with a minilateral. Of course, the other one would be AUKUS. Next slide, please. So our advocates of minilateralism contend such ranges are more effective in providing security solution. Next slide, please. So again, an example of a trilateral was formed exactly last year, when you have the Philippines, US, and Japan held their first ever Trilateral Summit meeting at Camp David, Maryland. Next slide, please. Just briefly. This historic event was held in the face of China's unrelenting expansion in the South China Sea and, of course, coercive action against the Philippines. Next slide. So in this joint vision, the three leaders expressed concern about Chinese coercive and expansionist behavior in the South China Sea. Next slide, please. So the idea of the trilateral relationship, again, when we talk about the base, did not come from Washington, did not come from Tokyo, it came here from Manila. Of course, this is the agenda of the Marcos administration in the light of the changes in Philippine foreign policy, moving away from the appeasement policy of the Duterte administration to one that challenges Chinese expansion head on. Of course, during his official visit in 2023, he basically shared the idea to former Japanese Prime Minister Kishida. Next slide, please. So during a press conference tail end of the 5-day official visit, President Marcos declared that, let's look at the possibility of a tripartite security agreement, bringing in the US, of course, with Japan and the Philippines as, again, I will emphasize, as the base. Next slide, please. President Marcos remarks that fact could be a central element to providing more stability in the face of challenges and changes. Next slide, please. So all those developments were happening in the face of these three countries intensifying tension relations with China, and of course the growing fear in the Philippines that whether we like it or not, on the basis of our geography, on the basis of the fact that we are a treaty ally of the United States, and we have 200,000 Filipinos in Taiwan, whether we like it or not, we cannot adopt a policy of neutrality, will be dragged in. Okay, next slide. So I'll just race through the path to the Trilateral Summit. Next slide, next slide, please. So the idea of a trilateral security partnership between Japan and the Philippines is not new, since actually the three countries have been cooperating on an informal basis. Next slide, please. So, of course, what basically triggered this idea of a trilateral was, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the consequent Russia-Ukraine war. Next slide, please. So from the 2023 to 2024, Tokyo and Washington decided to engage Manila strategically. For, of course, Japan, the Philippines remains a key factor in preventing China's political and ideological diplomatic stranglehold from spreading force in the Western Pacific. Of course, Japan played a very active role in preventing the Philippines, especially during the time of the Duterte administration, from pivoting towards China, basically laying the foundation for what I will call the base of this trilateral relations. It's not to do with the US or the Philippines at that time. It was strained because of the Duterte. It was the Philippines and Japan. The late Shinzo Abe did, move heaven and earth to basically prevent Manila from gravitating towards Beijing. Next slide, please. Of course, staying from Tokyo's calculation, as the two frontline countries facing Chinese maritime expansion, Japan and the Philippines have increasingly recognized each other as natural in terms of geography. Both countries are located in the first island chain. Both countries, of course, in the middle of those two countries are, of course, Taiwan. Next slide, please. Japanese Cabinet Secretary Matsuo declared Japan will begin offer. This was mentioned earlier. Next slide. Philippines is one of the most probable candidates to receive this. Of course, we have been receiving this. Next slide, please. Following month, of course, the Japanese Self-Defense Force joined the annual Philippine-U.S. Selective Military as observer. We're now seeing slowly Japanese boots on the ground here in the Philippines. Next slide. So this was intended, of course, to encourage the Japanese Self-Defense Forum to assume a more formal role in maintaining order status quo in the South China Sea. Again, the issue of burden sharing in NATO in terms of U.S. allies, Japan is already doing it here in the Indo-Pacific. Next slide. So, of course, you have the initial trilateral conversation leading to media reports implying the three countries plan to create a trilateral consultative mechanism for the respective national security advisors. Next slide, please. After a map separating three countries' national security advisor then met on the side of the side of the ASEAN meeting in Jakarta and discussing. Next slide. They also agreed to collectively address China's unilateral attempt to change the status quo in the disputed waters. Next slide. I'll just breeze through this course. In New York happened. Next slide. I just want to the three foreign ministers also discussed ways to support economic resilience deepen trilateral cooperation and in energy infrastructure, digital economy issues, enhance trilateral security, including, of course, maritime domain awareness, humanitarian assistance. So it is broader than just simply security. What is important in this trilateral relations is the importance of economic security. That's not covered in terms of the Philippine-U.S. alliance or, of course, in the Philippine-Japan security partnership. Next slide, please. So let's look at basically the trilateral Japan-U.S. trilateral. What's basically there? Next slide, please. So, of course, the meeting that happened in April 2011 last year in Camp David, after, of course, former Prime Minister Kishida met former President Joe Biden, and the only one who's still incumbent is President Bongbong Marcos Jr. Next slide. Security Partners Committee Ministers create such recently launched four-nation maritime cooperative activity. Next slide. All efforts are helped to secure the Philippines, secure its territorial waters and exclusive economic zone. Next slide. The three leaders also expressed severe concern over Chinese coercive expansionist behavior in the South and East China Sea, as a firm, of course, also emphasizing again a statement that came out, which of course did not make people in Beijing very happy. Taiwan is an important issue. Next slide. So the U.S.-Japan summit draws attention to developing what is called a Southern Trilateral relationship. You have, of course, in the north, Tokyo, Seoul, and the U.S. down here, Manila, Tokyo, and of course, Washington, D.C. Next slide. Summit also focused on fostering, intensifying economic cooperation. Luzon Corridor, seeking to redirect supply chains from China, minimize their overall economic relation. Next slide. Raised also prospect of economic measure to finance construction of critical infrastructure in the Philippines, diverting its raw materials export away from China. Next slide, please. Again, important, I mentioned it earlier, the Luzon Economic Corridor, which is a project designed to accelerate investment in infrastructure development to enhance connectivity at the major Philippine island zone. Why Luzon? Just in case you have push comes to shove in the Taiwan Strait, industrial facilities in Luzon, especially southern part of Luzon up to Batangas, would play a very crucial role in providing repair infrastructure for your ships, planes, and also for the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. So you need an industrial base if push comes to shove would happen in the Taiwan Straits. Next slide, please. And of course, this is something very crucial, the base. I think in the light of the changes that's happening in the region, what we could maintain at this point in time is the base of this trilateral relation. So in July 2024, Japan and the Philippines held their second Philippine-Japan Foreign Defense Minister meeting in Manila to strengthen the two allies. Strategic partnership, of course, in the light of changes here in the Indo-Pacific region and now changes in Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. Okay, let's just reaffirm importance of stability across Taiwan Strait and call for peaceful resolution. Next slide. Okay, of course, during the Philippine-Japan meeting, the two sides signed, and this is something emphasized by Ambassador Endo, the Reciprocal Access Agreement. First time that Japan signed an RAA with a Southeast Asian country, ASEAN, which is aimed at developing capabilities, promoting interoperability, and this is something very crucial, between the armed forces of the Philippines and the Japanese Self-Defense Force. Next slide, please. So, U.S. Secretary of State, former Secretary of State Blinken, and of course, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visited Tokyo and Manila to meet with their counterpart, basically setting the groundwork, creating the base. Next slide, please. Holding of two executive meetings marked the simultaneous coordinating strengthening of two alliances in the Indo-Pacific, along with the efforts of Japan and the Philippines to establish close linkages between them. Next slide. SMART, of course, is still but emerging security network to balance China's revisionist and irredentist agenda in the South China Sea against Taiwan. Next slide, please. So I'll just focus on the base. This is what I mentioned about the base. Given the fact that you have changes happening elsewhere, what is important is the base. So let's look at the base of the triangle. The immediate result of the formation of Philippine-Japan-U.S. security trilateral relationship is the strengthening of the Philippine-Japan security partnership, constituting the base of this trilateral security relations. Next slide. So 3 months after the formation of the trilateral Japan-Philippine-U.S. security partnership, Japanese Foreign Minister Miwa Yuko, Defense Minister Keio met their Filipino counterparts for the 2+2. This is something that has not yet been discussed because we're always focused on what's happening in Washington. What's happening between Tokyo and Manila, I think, will matter a lot. Next slide, please. The foreign minister discussed security environment during the second +2 meetings as they exchanged views on regional issues such as East China Sea, the South China Sea, Taiwan, and the Korean Peninsula. Next slide, please. The holding of the July 8, 2024, plus, of course, the signing of the reciprocal access agreement reflect the growing alignment of two U.S. allies. We don't have NATO here in the Indo-Pacific region, but you have U.S. allies establishing relationship with each other. Next slide, please. So Japan and the Philippines expressed their goals of further developing defense capabilities and interoperability of the Japan Self-Defense Force and the Armed Forces of the Philippines through bilateral, multilateral exercise. I don't know if the Japanese Self-Defense Force would participate in this coming Balikatan. And that will, China, of course, will be looking at other countries, even Washington, will be looking at how we interact with each other. Next slide, please. Foreign Minister recognized the significance of the signing of the RA, which both considered as a historical milestone in the two countries' bilateral defense relations. Next slide. Indicates also Tokyo's recognition of Manila as a security partner situated in a strategic jump point. I just attended a conference about Taiwan, so forth and so on. We don't have the military capability. We're developing the Armed Forces of the Philippines. What we have, of course, is the location and, of course, what Donald Trump mentioned when he visited the Philippines in 2017. What basically said when he was on its way back to Washington, D.C., the Philippines offers a great piece of real estate in a strategic location. He's really a real estate agent. Next slide, please. Signing of the RA also shows Japan's intention to further promote security defense cooperation with the Philippines and support of the stability in the Indo-Pacific region. Next slide. I think this is the conclusion made possible. Okay, next slide. Let's just go to the conclusion. So it's just some of the issues associated. Okay. Of course, this was a term used during the Biden administration, lattice of cooperation, linking all those security partnerships together. We don't have a NATO here in the Indo-Pacific region, but you have, of course, an emerging system of lattice work of cooperation, linking several unilateral relationships. Next slide. Lattice work of cooperation made U.S. allies, Japan, Australia, the Philippines, strengthening their bilateral, trilateral strategic cooperation to bolster defense capabilities independently and to align aggregate defense capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region. What if the center is gone? What if the hub disappears and the spokes remain? We have to link those spokes together. Next slide, please. 4 U.S. allies share strategic perspective in viewing China as a quintessential security threat in the region, but they do not necessarily align completely in all matters. Next slide. I want to finish this right away. So let's go to the conclusion. I think I've overspent my time. Admiral Ong is looking at me. Okay, next slide. Okay, vision. Okay, some of the concerns. This trilateral security project could evolve either to AUKUS-like strategic multilateralism or a quad functioning case that could, of course, again, many of our ASEAN colleagues are not very happy with this. I was in Singapore when the trilateral relationship was announced, and a very prominent Singaporean public intellectual criticized the trilateral relationship in front of me. I cannot help but to react. Next slide, please. Manila close security ties with Tokyo and Washington are complicated. ASEAN's goal of serving supposed to be the intermediary between the U.S. and China by being the honest broker. And of course, for many of our ASEAN, in fact all, probably except with the exception of Vietnam, would look at this as a problem. ASEAN is not anymore playing its role as the honest broker between China and the United States. Next slide, please. Nevertheless, one thing is clear, this trilateral security cooperation among Japan, Philippines, of course, hopefully, despite the Trump administration, would ensure that we keep the United States engaged in the region and hopefully maintain this continuity of security and defense policy in the Indo-Pacific region. I think this is the last slide. Next slide. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Renato De Castro. I feel like that's an hour worth of class lecture that we just had there in 15 minutes. All right, thank you very much, Dr. De Castro. Our next speaker is a former Vice Commander of the Philippine Navy. Currently, he is a professor of praxis at the Ateneo School of Government and also a non-resident fellow at the Stratbase Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome retired Rear Admiral Romel Jude Ong. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. So I'll try to recover from the overtime from the previous speakers. I wish. Anyway, so I'll start with an anecdote. So in my previous life, I was the assistant joint staff for operations, and the former President Duterte just came into power in 2016. So we decided to cross the block and walk over to JUSMAG office. It's in Camp Aguinaldo. And he said to the staff there, we need a plan B. If Duterte kicks you out of the Philippines, we need to talk to Japan and have them as a sort of a replacement partner for us. I think I'm now envisioning the JUSMAG guys crossing the same road that we crossed in 2016, going to joint headquarters, saying we need a plan B. Just the same. Anyway, what is the US Indo-Pacific strategy? That's the question mark. To me, it's not clear since most of the narrative that's coming out is about Taiwan, moving the chips to Arizona, and about a 10% increase, 10% of GDP of Taiwan to be devoted to defense. But nowhere in the current narrative are we looking at something more holistic in terms of the region. That's a problematic. From what I see now, President Trump is looking first at his own backyard, okay? Arresting the inroads made by China in Canada as well as in Mexico through drugs as well as other areas. Greenland, I think Trump is trying to arrest China's attempt at creating an Arctic road between mainland China towards the Arctic Ocean. And that block on the road would have to be Greenland. Is Trump trying to do a reverse Nixon? I don't know. The contention is he's not. But I think we should pray that he does, because otherwise what we're looking at here in the region is a China, Russia, North Korea axis if the reverse Nixon doesn't work. What is he doing in Ukraine? I think he's trying to create an exit strategy for the US. It's not a very nice and comfortable exit strategy because it's going to be bloody. But I think he needed that exit strategy, not only for Ukraine, but also for Gaza, to create the conditions, I think, for the Middle East for a reset of the Abraham Accord. What we're looking at also is an attempt to rebuild the US military. I think in several fora I mentioned already the problem of the US Navy, the PLA Navy has surpassed the US Navy since 2015. And I think the pronouncement of Trump on this aspect has been, supports this position of mine. One is he directed the Secretary of the Navy to focus on shipbuilding, and he created an office on shipbuilding within the White House. So the problem we have now on the South China Sea is a regional imbalance of naval power. And that created the conditions for the PLA Navy, the Chinese Coast Guard, and its militia to run roughshod against the Philippines in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. Now, what are we looking at on the impact of the regional security alliances, particularly for the Philippines and Japan? We're looking at Chinese increase in coercive posture, not only in the South China Sea, but maybe in East China Sea. we're going to see an increase of Chinese footprint in mid-Pacific, particularly in Solomon Islands and Cook Islands. And I've mentioned this problem before. Philippines will feel what it likes, will likely feel what it feels to be a chicken sandwich, because we will be in the first and the second island chain if Chinese mid-Pacific strategy takes shape and gains traction. We may also look at the need to mitigate U.S. drawdown on forces in the Indo-Pacific. My worst case scenario is a Trump-Xi Jinping modus vivendi, and the Philippines as a sacrificial lamb for that modus vivendi. And that is the thing that we need to look at as a worst case scenario that we need to mitigate, and we need a plan B. The discourse on the Typhoon missile system, an example, the Typhoon missile system is not just a weapon system. It's actually creates that it disrupts China's escalation dominance over the Philippines. And rightfully so, China is intent on trying to restore the dominance in terms of escalation. What we've seen in the region is an explosion of unilateral arrangements, both at the Track 2, Track 1.5, and Track 1. Only a few weeks ago, we had this same Track 2 discussion with the Philippines, Japan, and Australia, precisely on the basis that Trump-proofing the three countries, okay, in terms of security and economic resiliency. I think by third quarter, we will move towards a Track 1.5. So without further violating the Chatham rules of that engagement or discussion, this is something we need to look at. Alternative regional security mechanisms where US will not play a major role. Okay? We do not have a history of alliance compared to Europe, but it's something we need to take a hard look, because if not, then we will have problems. The Philippines has diversified its partnership beyond the US, with Japan as its partner, Australia, etc. But I think the Philippines needs to rationalize all these engagements somehow, because from what from the outside looking in, it's like chop suey type of dinner or lunch, and we need to have some form of structure to it. Philippines need to increase its defense spending and identify essential capabilities. When I was still in the Navy, 2016, our existential challenge was the PLA Navy surface fleet. Now there's the Coast Guard and there's the militia. So the Philippines need to look also at asymmetric solutions to this problem in case we go kinetic. And it needs to trim the force structure and redesign it from a counterinsurgency organization to something that is more equipped for external defense. Are there opportunities for strengthening trilateral cooperation? Of course, yes. But we need to look at, to follow through. Will the commitments during Biden in Washington, D.C. during the trilateral summit still hold? If not, on the US side, we need to look at the Japanese-Philippine side of that trilateral summit commitments and work our way to achieving them. We need more security and economic engagements, and we need realistic solutions in other areas, particularly shipbuilding, which is still, to me, in the Philippines, a critical requirement. About evolving multilateral dynamics, including ASEAN and Quad. My personal view is ASEAN is a lost cause as a multilateral structure when dealing with China. It has been effectively co-opted in its political elites through economic subversion. We need to identify ASEAN member states that can still be engaged, for example, Vietnam, and work our way to woo the others that have been severely co-opted. On Quad, my idea for this has been ever since been looking at spheres of cooperation, India in the South, in the Indian Ocean areas, Japan in East Asia, and Australia in the Mid-Pacific. I think that ends my discourse. Thank you. And
Thank you very much, Admiral Romel Ong. Very interesting. And maybe the ambassador later can have a comment on what he said. All right. Okay. Our final speaker for today is an associate professor from the Kobe City University of Foreign Affairs. Let us all welcome Dr. Saya Kiba.
I also have some slides, just to support my argument. But anyway, thank you very much. Good morning. At the age of 21, I came to the Philippines. I decided to study in the Philippines, so I studied in UP Diliman. I stayed here, and then I worked in the Philippines, work and study for almost 8 years. So I was trained and educated in this country, and I'm very much proud of that. And I'm always happy to be back in Metro Manila, the Philippines. So my reaction to the keynote speakers, it's mainly based on my observation to the bilateral relations between Japan and the Philippines. Okay? So let me start with the question why the Philippines is so important to Japan in bilateral setting. And of course, as the ambassador and the other speakers mentions, officially speaking, in the official gazette and then the statement, the both countries, Japan and the Philippines, share the sea lane, and we are both obstacle to the China's maritime expansion. We share the basic value of rule of law, democracy, and free and open ocean. But personally, this is my opinion. This is my perspective. It is very important that the Philippines is very important for Japan because the Philippines has been a partner to demonstrate our incremental change of defense cooperation in the region, in Southeast Asia, and particularly we have demonstrated the use of the self-defense forces in overseas missions. And Japan has gradually trained and learned to equip ourselves, equip Japan itself legally and administratively through the generosity of the Philippines by practice. So it was just like a learning by doing kind of process. I'd like to elaborate more. Next slide, please. In 2014, when the then Prime Minister Abe visited Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, he gave a keynote speech, and then he launched the idea that Japan will combine various assistance menu to Southeast Asian partners in ASEAN, combining ODA, official development assistance, the traditional ones, but more for strategic use, such as Coast Guard exchange or the Coast Guard vessels. And also the defense equipment and technology cooperation, it's a diplomatic term for the arms export, the capacity building by the self-defense forces. So these are the new component by Japanese government extended to Southeast Asian countries. And now we have OSA, the official security assistance, starting 2 years ago. So, and then fortunately, the Philippines has been always the very first recipient of those new menus, new security-related assistance from Japan. So that's why I'm telling you that it is a demonstration. It is only, the Philippines is always the field of demonstration of our cooperation, the new menus. And then, well, many of my Southeast Asian students criticize or believe that it is like a securitization of our aid. Next slide, please. Okay, so of course our soldiers are already on the ground in the soil, and this is a capacity building program by the self-defense forces. Next slide, please. Yeah, but it's not really securitization. I don't believe it is. We are securitizing because we have still a lot of challenges and the problems legally and also administratively. So I want to say that it is just an incremental change. The basic idea, the basic problem is that even though in the past decade, Japan lifted so many legal restrictions, we eased a lot of legal restrictions. However, administrative reform is not really catch up to our new packages or new menus. For example, this is not about the Philippines, but in 2003, when Japan and the Philippines sent the troop to Iraq, we didn't have Ministry of Defense yet. We had we have the Defense Agency, and Defense Agency was upgraded to Ministry of Defense in Japan only in 2007. Okay? So we send the troop based on the political will, but most of the time, the legal support or the administrative backup system from the Tokyo is still not very sufficient. So that's a problem. But anyway, the political will always goes first. Okay? So even though the Prime Minister Abe come up with this kind of idea, there's no grand strategy. We have national security strategy, emphasizing the importance between Japan and the like-minded countries. But there's no concrete action plan. There's no strategy for Japan-Philippine defense cooperation. What will be the ultimate goal? There's no written document. So that's why my Southeast Asian students are always, confused because they have they cannot quote any official statement. And everybody said that it's a securitization. Japan is changing a lot, but we are not changing a lot. So there's no incoherent message. For example, the capacity building by the self-defense forces, they never use the word of maritime security. We always use the word of, word focusing on the component of the military capacity, for example, HADR, or engineering, or ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or those kind of things. So it is not really coherent, lack of strategic messaging, lack of strategic communication. And then our approach is still very, very aid worker-like. Our ODA, we are always proud of our ODA is needs-based, ownership-centric, and an aid workers approach, but it is also applied for the defense cooperation. And we don't have like winning heart and mind kind of approach unlike the USA and Australia. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is an example how our defense cooperation is not equipped. So the Abe administration in 2013 sent more than 1,100 JSDF members to the Philippines in Tacloban. But they had we didn't have so far, we didn't have status of force agreement, right? We didn't have RAA. And even before that, in 2011, when our country was hit by the earthquake and tsunami, we didn't have so far our RAA with the other countries. Canadians, South Koreans, they came to Japan without any legal protection. Okay, so we have to protect the service members. So that's a core message, which we learned from that relief mission. Next slide, please. Okay, so we were quite appreciated by the local communities and the media. It was good. Yeah, next slide. But they also conducted a medical mission, but it was not covered by, there was no legal protection for them in case of the accident. Next slide. So that's why in 2015, when President Benigno Pinoy Aquino visited Japan, they already agreed the basis of the RAA. So everybody believes that the RAA is very reactive to the China's move in the ocean, but it was already prepared in 2015. The basic idea is how to protect our service members of the armed forces and JSDF. Next slide. So based on that, I would like to emphasize such a unique approach on bilateral relations between Japan and the Philippines, and probably those are the future area for cooperation. Of course, we will continue the diplomatic effort, number one, okay? And number two is civilian effort. So today we discuss a lot about security, defense cooperation, but still the civilians can do a lot. Okay. Security, when you say security, when you see national security policy of the Philippines 2023 to 2028, they identify the security not only for the national sovereignty, it includes the ecological balance, climate change resilience, public safety, economic strengths. When I interview the Filipino elites, the policymakers, and then if I raise a question on the security in the Philippines or security cooperation between the two countries, many people mention that, Mindanao peace. Right? So Mindanao peace is a security matter for the Filipinos, right? And then our Mindanao peace building was done by the civilian effort. We never send our troops to Mindanao. So we can do a lot of things to meet the various security needs in this country. That's number two. And then I'd like to particularly emphasize number 3 and number 4. The number 3 is about the public goods, delivering the public goods together to the other countries. And number 4 is the welfare and resilience problem. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. 2 years ago, the Japanese government provided capacity building for the combat engineering battalion in this country. Right? It's for the HADR, disaster relief and engineering. And at the same time, the Japanese government gave the disaster relief equipment to the Philippines by ODA. And when our Defense Minister Nakatani visited this country last month, he observed that in the 525 Battalion here in Metro Manila. But we can discuss beyond the capacity building, because this equipment and these the professional soldiers were sent to Turkey in February 2023. Okay? So in that sense, the Philippines and Japan can be a donor together to expand our public goods to the other countries. I think that can be a very good model, or the new model. So we can bring something together to make a spillover effect to the other countries, to the third countries. Next, please. Okay. And then in terms of disaster relief, in terms of the international disaster relief operations, the Philippines is still new to send the troop for the disaster relief in the other countries. But Japan already started it in 1987, and so we already have a good model of dispatchment process. In our country, the civilian is led by JICA, and then self-defense forces component is totally different. So they have different command system and different dispatch system. And then we have a long discussion on the civil-military coordination, interagency coordination, how to deal with the local government, the discussion between Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Defense and the cabinet officer. So probably we can share such a administrative capability or administrative setup, how to institutionalize the disaster relief activities abroad and overseas missions. So probably that will be the new field, I guess. Now, of course, we have AHA Center, and then we have Japan-ASEAN cooperation. But what is needed is that Japan-Philippines can provide something together for the other countries, for the third parties. And I think that it's better for the other ASEAN member state to ride on, because it is really for the public goods delivery. We always, among the Quad member states, we always discuss the importance to emphasize the public goods delivery, the tangible outcome of the cooperation. Because if it is only for the security or mutual defense, probably the other ASEAN member states reject that kind of idea. So giving the tangible effect, tangible public goods is very important, I believe. The final point, next slide, is the welfare and well-being of the soldiers. We're always talking about the capacity and equipment, right? Equipment procurement, etc. And then also the unit exchange. However, we can do more. Okay? For our service members and also the reservists and conscript. This is me in uniform. I'm a reservist of Japan Self-Defense Forces. And I'm a minority. Reservist is very minority in Japan. Female reservist is particularly minority. And then we have, in our system, we are not engaged in any overseas missions. So we wonder what other Asian service members, particularly the female service members, are considering, what they are doing. And next slide, please. So these are the area we can discuss, not only the service members, but the civilians or the security sector the professionals, women, peace and security. I think the Philippines is much more advanced than Japan. Female and gender minority service members, recruitment. Okay, we have a lot of problem in recruitment in Japan because of the aging society. And then we are interested in the so-called lateral entry system between the armed forces of the Philippines and Australia, to expand that capacity and the service member personnel. Peacekeeping, we both have an experience in peacekeeping in the different countries, and the treatment of casualties and dead soldiers. So those are the things. This is my last slide. Sorry. This is one of the examples. In the end of last year, East-West Center of Washington, D.C. set up, call for applicants for this trilateral female security professionals for US, Korea, and Japan. So it's the northern part, the northern trilaterals. And then it includes the security incorporation, cyber, critical and emerging technologies, issues on the ground. So this is not for the, it is different from the unit exchange. This is a kind of think tank or civil society exchange to discuss deeper for the security issues, because security does not limit to the regular service members, regular members. So we can do something like this, because without the big money, without big funding, even without the US funding. Unfortunately, this program is still suspended because under the new administration. I applied, but it's all suspended. Okay, final slide. Okay, so conclusion, Japan has developed a very unique approach to supporting effort for peace and stability in the Philippines. Most was even realized without the deployment of the self-defense forces. So a lot of things have been done by civilian effort, and there remains much room to develop more flexible and inclusive assistance based on the local security needs, which can be spilled over to the other ASEAN countries or the external partners. And the Philippines is the partner for Japan to demonstrate its incremental change of defense diplomacy. We are still learning by doing. Okay, thank you very much. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saya Kiba. So at this point, we will now proceed to our open forum. So we would like to invite our speakers back in front, please, for the open forum. So, and I believe Dr. Ken Jimbo is still joining us live via Zoom. So again, may we invite in front Mr. Hiroyuki Akita, Dr. Renato De Castro, Admiral Romel Ong, and Dr. Saya Kiba. And of course, Dr. Jimbo from Tokyo. And I will also be joining the open forum. I will be moderating the discussion in my capacity as the Deputy Executive Director of the Stratbase Institute. Hello. All right. Good morning again, everyone. Hold on. All right, quite a lot to unpack from your very comprehensive presentations. So I guess my first question would be, I'll be asking my initial questions, and then later on I'll be opening the floor for questions from our participants here in the venue. All right. We've been talking about the trilateral cooperation among the US, Japan, and the Philippines. And with the US, Japan, Philippines trilateral security partnership now in place, and considering all the developments happening and that happened and happening in the White House, how do you assess the overall outlook for maritime security in the West Philippine Sea, in our part of the world, in the West Philippine Sea, and even in the Senkaku Islands? Maybe we can ask Dr. Jimbo first.
Well, thank you very much for your...
Especially, sir, in light of the continuous aggressive actions of China in the West Philippine Sea.
Sure. Thank you very much for your question.
Sir, we cannot hear you, unfortunately.
Really? Can
Unmute.
you let...
Can we try that again, Dr. Jimbo?
Yes. I think my mic is on. I think my mic is on. I think something problem that your speakers was not really transformed.
Yeah, that's okay. All right. Can maybe hear your answer, sir?
Is that now it's audible?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay, great. So well, thank you very much for your question, and definitely this is the critical agenda, that how much we really can sustain the pace of the developments of the cooperation in order to deal with ever heightening tension in the West Philippine Sea. I think that in 2010 we dealt with other issue called the East China Sea, especially over the Senkaku, and then we are able to obtain the U.S. Constant commitment over application of the Article 5 in the case of Senkaku. And at the same time that we have decided to upgrade our Coast Guard capability in order to deal with so-called seamless cooperation, starting from the law enforcement and then to the gray zone challenges, and maritime self-defense force comes in, then the United States will be there. So that's a kind of full level seamless coordination needs to be addressed. Why it is important? Because we don't want China to frame the Senkaku issue as a one-by-one issue between China and Japan. If United States declare that they are not interested in committing to the gray zone challenges, China will expand the gray zone as much as possible until they confirm the change of status quo, not through the invasion, but only through the expansion of the forces. And the thing that you have a very different viewpoint in the Philippines is that, first of all, the demography, the coverage of the area is very, very wide. And there are, I think, nuanced, I think, gradational status of how much you can really expand your law enforcement activities, because that the coverage areas is too large. And then there are different contexts in the each of the Filipino islands to be defended in context of the how much those capability will be mixed together. So in that context, I think it is very important to customize the way of the capability provided by the United States together with the Philippines, and then to send the constant message to China, because there is no kind of breakthrough or window of opportunity they can really penetrate into that area. So that although we don't really expect there will be an enthusiastic kind of commitments to be addressed by the United States under this administration, but I think it's always important to let those military branches and also the law enforcement counterparts to have the constant exercising and the demonstration of the will through those exercises. So that I think those are my comments to your questions.
Right, very interesting. Thank you very much, Dr. Jimbo. From our Japanese experts here, would you like to comment, Mr. Akita?
Thank you very much. Maybe I want to make a two quick point. One, I think our discussion, including me, instinctively we discussed how to deal with the South China Sea or East China Sea situation with the pre-Trump notion, concept. But now it is time for us to discuss based on the post-Trump or Trump world concept. Difference is that pre-Trump, we can insist South China Sea, status quo South China Sea is important because it represents the rule of law. So if China changes the status quo by force, maybe we can tell the US that you have to engage in order to maintain rule-based order. That was a kind of persuasion, but it was already, we are in a completely different world, unfortunately. So my point is that under the Trump world, we have to create a narrative to induce US commitment, not based on a rule-based order, but kind of like a transactional narrative. For example, South China Sea contains a huge amount of natural resources. So if China control, it's going to be a huge loss for US and for others. So that kind of a I'm sorry to say that, but this kind of a transactional explanation to persuade US to come to here to defend South China Sea is very important, and as well as Senkaku and so on. And second point is that we should separate peacetime competition against China and wartime cooperation. We discussed about the many unilateral cooperation, port visit, joint exercise are all peacetime competition in order to deter China. So it is very important, and we are doing it actually. But the question is how to fight and push back in the wartime. And I think we tend to mix together, and we tend to satisfy by ourselves by discussing about the peacetime cooperation and deterrence. But we really need to have a deeper discussion about wartime cooperation.
So we need to make them an offer that they can't refuse, something like that. All right. What would this be? Maybe Dr. Kiba or Dr. De Castro, you're nodding your head earlier. What is a transaction that would reassure security?
We mentioned two very important flashpoints where, of course, the trilateral security relations would play a very important role. That's, of course, South China Sea and Senkaku, but we forgot the actual reason why the trilateral security partnership was formed. It's Taiwan. So Taiwan is actually the main point regarding this. Number one, of course, you have American, that's why we have the EDCA sites. And have also the reciprocal access agreement, wherein, of course, the Japanese Self-Defense Force could operate not only from Okinawa, but also south. And of course, this is very vital because in a Taiwan situation, they expect the Chinese Navy or PLA to take control of the Luzon Strait. The Philippine Navy simply doesn't have the capability. We would need allies and, of course, security partners. So that's a crucial point when you talk about possibly not just deterrence, as you mentioned. That's where I think in terms of possible wartime. I think, I heard it from a Chinese academic. China has three core interests: South China Sea, Tibet, and Taiwan. But for them, Taiwan is the most important. It's the core because it has to do with the very existence of Xi Jinping as the Secretary General, and of course the Communist Party of China, the unification with what they call the renegade province. And of course, based on the statements of Indo-PACOM commanders from Admiral Davidson to Admiral Aquilino, and recently, of course, Admiral Paparo, and even I was in Taiwan last January from the National Security Advisor of Taiwan. It's not very far. Yeah, maybe 2 years from now.
Maybe for Dr. Kiba, while strengthening trilateral military cooperation is essential, what do you think are diplomatic strategies that the Philippines, Japan, and the United States can pursue collectively to also manage tensions and prevent escalation with China in the West Philippine Sea?
You're asking the diplomatic effort, yeah? Well, the conventional approach, the traditional approach of signaling, etc., is also important. But to consider the reaction from the rest of Southeast Asian countries, I think the Japan have accumulated so much tactics how to deal with the other countries. So it's the very important keyword is inclusiveness. Yeah? This is not against. It is not to eliminate some particular country. Of course, we will be against the aggressive move of some particular countries, but it should be very inclusive. So every option or every dialogue should be open to the third partners, particularly the ASEAN. And also, what is important is to include the Pacific Islands. In that sense, the Philippines has much experience. The U.S. also have a much experience working with the Pacific Islands in security, in disaster relief, or also for the capability, public health, nutrition. So those are the things, So it will be the stepstone for the South-South cooperation. And then if we can show some models of South-South cooperation and how it can eventually stabilize the region or make to contribute to the trust building among the Indo-Pacific, it will be great.
All right, thank you, ma'am. And then my last question before I open the floor for questions from the audience for Admiral Ong, sir. Sir, in your speech, you talked about the worst case scenario, a possibility of Trump and Xi Jinping modus vivendi, or an agreement as a worst case scenario. Can you tell us more about this, sir, and what can cause this to happen? What are the repercussions should this happen?
My framing here is that President Trump is trying to address the great power competition, and he's trying to that's his priority. So that means how does he work out in the relationship of the United States with both Russia and China in this? Unfortunately, those in the middle powers or small powers are not part of that. To my mind, not part of that framing that he has on his part. So he's trying to solve that first. And sometimes I believe that his solution may at some point require sacrificing some of the middle powers that are hanging around in the area. So, yes.
How can the trilateral partnership, is there anything we can do to stop this from happening?
We survived President Duterte because the armed forces held the line. Okay. So Indo-PACOM needs to hold the line. That's it.
You want to add something?
Okay, let me expound on this. I've heard these two versions, no? One version coming from the Americans, the other version coming from the Chinese. The notion of the G2, sort of what you call an Indo-Pacific Yalta, where the great powers would divide. According to the Chinese version, they will draw the line. The line, of course, would be Hawaii. So everything that's happening west of Hawaii would be China's business. Everything that's happening east of Hawaii would be America's business. But the Chinese promised that they would tell the Americans what they would do in their part of the sea. It happened in the past. It happened in the Second World War, though I have the Yalta and Potsdam. So again, that's if a great power like the United States would like to decide that, again, there's a concept that's coming out. We see peace at all costs. If that will matter a lot, peace at all costs, then the option of a G7 is more apparent than ever.
All right, thank you, sir. Do we have questions from the audience? Okay, from Ambassador Evan Garcia.
Thank you. There's a very old saying, amateurs discuss strategy, professionals discuss logistics. So let's look at the base of any military capability, which is the industrial side. How much traction would that have with the Trumpist administration to work with Japan's industrial formidable base to do something in the Philippines? Is there some buy-in here where American industry could benefit? Lower costs, we'll give them, I don't know, tariff benefits or something. Something that would move American industrial capability here for their benefit. So I'm just asking that. Thank you.
Dr. Jimbo, would you like to address the question?
Well, thank you very much. I try to be sounding like a professional, but let me try. I guess that there has been the declaration of Japan that we have decided to double the size of the defense budget by 2027. And there are unprecedented amount of the procurements that we plan for in coming years. And that involves the lots of US-Japan cooperation on the defense industry base. And we have specified, especially on the space, constellation satellites will be the one, and specific features like the hypersonic missiles and the hypersonic missile defense capabilities, integrated C4I systems in enhancing on those standoff defense capability. We are purchasing, we are also developing the counter-strike capability that might have 1,500 kilometers range, and that needs to be integrated together with U.S. C4I system. And that's on the U.S.-Japan side of the corporation, some of the highlights of the Defense Industry Corporation. And lots of U.S. firms are now co-located in Tokyo in order to have a 24/7 corporation with counterparts like Mitsubishi, Kawasaki, and those. And you mentioned about the Philippines. And then I think that there should be a very important arena, which is a shipbuilding, which was reiterated by the president's speech in the Congress, and many experts need to say. According to the many statistics, that the shipbuilding capacity in the United States have been diluted significantly. In order to achieve the defense innovation that each of the services are now planning, you cannot really achieve it by not having the enough capacity of the shipbuilding, repairing, and the replacing kind of a swift kind of processes. And United States has been asking, especially towards Japan and Korea, to share the production capacity, and which we don't really have an extra capacity, but Korea may have. But this kind of capacity is something that is also related so much to the Philippines. And think about the case, for example, several years ago in the Subic, that there was a bankruptcy on the Hanjin, shipbuilding case, and that has to be replaced by somebody else. And I think Filipino government, NSC, has been very robustly addressed to this issue. There has to be the friendly nation that has to take over. And then that the U.S. Serverless and Australia had take over those, and then to rebuild the capacity it is. And then those kind of model, I think that the provision of the friends and partnership capacity to build the ships in Philippines, providing the repairing functions in the Philippines, may have a strong strategic impact for the United States military industry to look at our, I think, capacity in the coming years.
All right. Thank you, sir. Anyone would like to add? Okay, sir.
Again, this is also emphasized by President Trump's speech, and also the speech of the new U.S. Secretary of the Navy, the importance of shipbuilding. Because China now, of course, everyone knows for a fact China now has a larger Navy in terms of numbers, not necessarily in terms of tonnage, and of course in terms of quality. But I was in a conference last year, and you have a Chinese wolf warrior diplomat, former colonel, who said in front of everyone, China now has the biggest Navy in the world. So of course, in wartime situation, some of the ships will be sank, and you need to replace them. And what is important, of course, is shipbuilding, emphasized. And the Philippines has, in fact, the fourth largest shipbuilding industry, but it doesn't build ships. And Ken mentioned about the Hanjin, the facility of Hanjin being bought by an American company, which is Cerberus, happened to be the defense. So it's very important. And of course, what the Philippines could offer is not only the shipyard. We have something that Japan does not have, or South Korea does not have: human power. We have the human power, and even, of course, in terms of country that send the most number of seafarers, it's the Philippines. It's also a challenge for us.
We have a question from General Resty. Okay, General Resty.
Well, not actually a question. It's just in support of the answer and the comments. It's indeed true that we are the fourth biggest shipbuilder in the world, but we are a far fourth. Of course, the leads are, China is already on top of that, South Korea and Japan. Needless to say, we have the talent to be able to upscale that. Unfortunately, our industrial base is still weak. We don't have a robust steel-making industry to support shipbuilding. But we do build ships because Tsumishi is based in Cebu, and they build big tonnage ships. In fact, many of the big tankers are coming from Tunishi, but they can only build as much in a given time frame because of their facility. Ostal is also there. They're also building, and they can expand. Now, I'm not sure about the discussions between Cerberus and these shipbuilders, But I think there is an invitation to move some of the shipbuilding to Subic. Not too sure about that though, but just to build up our capability will not take overnight. It will take a bit of time so that we need to build our industrial base. But that is the direction to offset what is happening now in China. And I guess the meat of the matter here is that if we want to make our strategic alliances varied and resilient and not only dependent on one nation, then we have to start already. Yesterday.
Thank you very much, General Resti. Anyone else? Any question from our audience? All right, no question. Okay, maybe we can go back to our audience later on. I have another question for our experts here. With the Japan-Philippines Reciprocal Access Agreement and the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, and of course the U.S.-Japan Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security, the three nations have established a strong foundation for defense cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. So given these interlaced security frameworks, what's next? What are the gaps that you are seeing from these frameworks, and what are additional measures that you think still needs to be agreed upon?
So maybe you can
especially, sir, in terms of enhancing regional stability and deterrence.
So I think we should reconsider the essence of peacetime deterrence capability vis-a-vis China. I'd like to make a 2 point. One, we don't have to build capability to defeat China, to deter China. Because if China goes to Taiwan Strait, to Taiwan, and fail, maybe it's going to be it will trigger this existential threat for CPP regime. Maybe they may lose the power if they cannot take Taiwan. So for them, in order to launch full-scale operation in Taiwan Strait or even in South China Sea, they have to be 120% sure that they will be definitely able to achieve the goal. I think 100% is too risky. So what we should do is to exploit this fragility of China's strategic calculation. So we don't have to lower their percentage of their military success to 0% or even 50%, but if we can lower their confidence to 99%, maybe they will stop, pause, and have to think. If it will go down like 80%, maybe it's going to be a big risk for them. Unlike Putin. Putin invaded Ukraine without the 120% confidence, because Putin knows that the time is not on the Russian side, so he thought that he cannot wait. But I think as long as China believes that, so second point, as long as China believes that time is on their side, I think they will try to wait until their confidence will go up beyond the 100%, 120%. So when China's economy will keep declining very rapidly, that is not the good news, but that may change their time framework in which they have to act. So that is a bad signal for us. That is.
Dr. Kiba, would you like to add as well?
Just very short. I think the first very important gap is if the Trump administration would again reconvene the trilateral summit. Again, this was a project, of course, of the former administration, Joe Biden, in Camp David. Will the present administration again convene the trilateral? Because the very basis, of course, of this trilateral security partnership is at the summit level. It has no working mechanism. So that's a challenge that if it will, President Donald Trump will decide that it's time again, let's invite President Bongbong Marcos and, of course, Prime Minister Ishiba, probably in camp or in Washington, or probably it might be an initiative, of course, of Japan. Japan will have to take a very important, Prime Minister Ishiba would have to take the initiative. This is important.
So what's next for the security and trilateral defense cooperation framework? I believe that we need some document. Of course, after the trilateral summit, there was a joint statement, but it's not particularly for the security. It's for the economic cooperation, for everything, right? But as I mentioned in my presentation, there's no official document. What will be the, for example, the 5 years plan? What will they do? Well, our basic line is that, of course, to keep the ocean free, and then we don't want the PRC to control the ocean in this region. But what should we do? So including the ship production, of course, and then what should I do? The capacity, equipment, whatever. And so without that, we can just do the ad hoc kind of needs survey. So every year, the MOD, our Ministry of Defense personnel comes to the Philippines, and then they have, of course, the ship port visit, and then they discuss something different, right? And then if they find some seeds for the funding, and they do that. So OSA, ODA, they have no strategy. Okay? So there's no goal after what we will do after 5 years with the US, and what will be the division of labor between the US and Japan for the capacity building in this country. So probably we need some concrete action plan. That's the next.
You have questions? Yes, sir.
Eric Lachica from the U.S. Filipinos for Good Governance. Having attended several seminars in the past, Stratbase, thank you. I'd just like to ask what you proposed of a strong civil defense disaster preparedness scenario. Is there an emerging consensus among the Indo-Pacific so-called allies about the so-called porcupine strategy, the porcupine in the room? I haven't heard any specifics how Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam will work with the Taiwanese people in civil defense, short of war. So could you address that scenario?
Not really for the civil defense or non-combatant evacuation operation from Taiwan. I think we also have to include Indonesia in that terms, because there are a lot of Indonesian nationals in Taiwan. But we have not yet started. Well, in a think tank level, or probably the war game inside the armed forces, they are doing that. So, disaster relief is different. Disaster relief, man-made, natural disaster is different, but we all, as long as I know, there's no discussion on such a man-made disaster or man-made contingency and how to retrieve our nationals.
There are no agreements.
No agreement, no? Probably the DFA of this country is, of course, brainstorming, I guess. And then, of course, our country is also, we have a lot of discussion in the Southern Island, the Southwest Island, and there is a discussion, or even the trainings for the non-combatant evacuation operation from Taiwan.
I have a question for our Filipino experts, Admiral Ong and Dr. De Castro. With the new Trump administration, what do you think what opportunities exist for the Philippines to further strengthen its defense cooperation with the United States, perhaps including military aid, training programs, and technology transfers? And a follow-up question, sir. How do you think will the new Trump administration affect the ongoing joint naval patrols happening already in the West Philippine Sea? Do you see this continuing, or do you see this maybe taking a pause with this new administration?
Okay, let me answer the last question first. My personal view is that joint patrol is problematic already at its current state. Okay, it's not a patrol if we only do it once every 3 months, once every 2 months. It's good for optics, but it doesn't have any battle space effect. Since we passed the Maritime Zones Act or law, they have increased patrols at the outer edge of that maritime zones that we have declared. So basically, they are challenging our ability to actually, and this is about no longer about international order or international rules-based order. It's about how do we protect or actually implement our own laws if we do not have the wherewithal to actually implement it. So they're challenging it now. When we passed the archipelagic sea lanes law, they have deployed one surface action group that passed through Mindoro Strait and conducted a gunnery exercise in Australia. So that means they are already contesting our ability to actually implement our laws, not international law. So joint patrols are good for optics, but we need to level up not only joint patrol, but unilateral surface action group patrols by our own armed forces. Because at the end of the day, it's our responsibility. Okay. Now, on the first question, what are the other opportunities? We need to look at where we are weak strategically, and that is where the gaps should be filled. Now, I like the Typhoon missile deployment, but because it creates a dilemma for China. I mean, it disrupts as I mentioned earlier, it disrupts the escalation dominance they enjoy over us, because it provides us, not us, but the US system, ability to actually touch them on the mainland. Now, that is not a sustainable undertaking. Philippines need to look at acquiring similar systems, not necessarily from the US or from other countries, maybe from Japan, South Korea, or maybe India, to actually have that deterrent effect.
All right, thank you, sir. Dr. De Castro, no comment. Okay, yes, please, Dr.
Yeah, so related to that question about how we should deal with Trump to make a lot of benefit out of that. So I think there are bad approach and good approach. Bad approach to Trump administration is to try to mitigate the risk that will be caused by Trump diplomacy or Trump approach to a security alliance. That kind of passive approach will end up by plus minus minus. So best approach is to try to take advantage of Trump, exploit from Trump. For example, Japan wanted to purchase Tomahawk for many years, but there are a lot of kind of a reluctance in Obama administration. But as soon as Obama changed to a Trump administration, the negotiation to procure Tomahawk accelerated, because Trump administration care less about the regional stuff. They're happy to sell anything that Japan can pay. So, second Trump, how should we propose to advantage? For example, if Japan wants to buy more highly sophisticated weaponry from US, which is very expensive, maybe we can offer high price, and they are willing to offer. They are willing to maybe sell. And also on the top of that, there are taboo discussion. One of that is nuclear deterrence capability or nuclear issue. So Biden administration was very, very cautious to deepen the discussion about the extended nuclear deterrence capability, because they are kind of like progressive people within the government. But maybe Trump administration is more willing to discuss about the nuclear capability issue. But I'm not saying that Japan should jump on the nuclear option at all, but at least there will be so much taboo about the discussion. So that is another kind of example that we can question.
Okay, can I add more? Well, of course, right now there's a sort of negative publicity regarding what the Trump administration has done in terms of dealing with Ukraine, in terms of dealing NATO. But we forgot basically what it has accomplished in the past. Two elements. Number one is ability to adopt something new, and of course to give the U.S. military greater leeway. Let me focus on this. To declare China and Russia as strategic competitor began during the Trump administration. This was something that, U.S. administration from President Nixon up to Barack Obama simply refused to accept the reality that China could never be a responsible stakeholder. It was if I use a term used by Ernest King, if, the shit hits the fan, that's where you bring in the son of a bitches. He's one of those. He was basically the one who said, China could never be a responsible stakeholder. China is a strategic competitor. and of course, giving the U.S. military greater leeway. The freedom of navigation operation began during the Obama administration, but there was an instruction then to the at that time PACOM, please inform China that we'll be conducting. For the Trump administration, no, and they conducted it consistently. So again, I agree to it. It gives the U.S. military greater leeway. It gives the Pentagon greater leeway to do what they want to do. You know, basically show to China that you have to take into account the deterrence capability of not necessarily the largest navy in the world, but definitely the most powerful navy in the world. That's the United States Navy. Recently, of course, we saw it happening with the Chinese sending a flotilla into the Tasmanian Sea, conducting military exercises. No one did not notice that the Americans asked a nuclear attack submarine to surface and make a port call in an Australian port. That is a very strong signal. Once the United States Navy asks a nuclear attack submarine to surface, it's sending a strong signal to China. I don't think that will happen in the Biden administration.
All right. Maybe Dr. Jimbo, did you want to add something? Perhaps even opportunities for both Philippines and Japan.
Well, I would like to share some Japanese defense policy perspective. According to the 2022 three strategic document, we have decided so many benchmark developments, including, as I mentioned, that double the size of defense budget, procuring of the counter-strike capabilities, and so on. But I think it is important to understand the context. And as you can easily imagine, that we are surrounded by troublesome neighbors, and the capability is rising. And there's no one-fits-all type of solution to each of those risks associated with it. China is China, North Korea is North Korea, and Russia is Russia. But they are coordinating together to even impose the higher demands and cost for our defense readiness and so on. So the context we have is that China is growing as a power who can constantly achieve the superiority in terms of the air naval superiority vis-a-vis Japan, and also cultivating the capability to deny the U.S. access to the region. So it is highly costly for the United States to fight inside the so-called the first island chain, and which is the fundamental issue that we face with. And then United States has a fundamental issue. There's no land location in the Western Pacific other than the U.S. bases in Japan. And also you have access, spots in the Philippines, but it is not really permanent, as you can see in the Cadena or in the Yokosuka. So definitely there would be a need for diversifying those kind of baselines in the Western Pacific. And here comes the EDCA, and here comes the Japanese needs for Philippines to speed up the processes of the EDCA. That's in Japan's critical national interest for the Philippines to have EDCA, and the United States can really diversify their position, so that there's a kind of context that how much we can really, bring this up. And then I mentioned about the OSA for EDCA, and why I said it, because we need to speed up the processes for the security of Japan and security of us. And then that's the context in looking at this agenda, way beyond the government, official lines. But I try to say this is, the only interpretation that I have. But secondly, on the RAA processes, and as Kiba-san has, already mentioned quite eloquently, that and then this could really be the baseline of how much of those kind of preparedness for starting from those disaster release humanitarian assistance concept, because you need to have a pre-positioning of the goods, and that you really have to deploy the forces within like a 48, 72 hours to save the lives. If the Philippines is affected by the typhoon or heavy like a natural disaster, definitely you need to really have those kind of legal arrangement prepare for this. But I have a second thoughts, which is not also in the official line. I don't think any official will mention it. I do think that there will be a revival of the agenda where Japanese ISR forces will be forward deployed in the Philippines. And I'm taking a bit robust stance on this because 10 years ago, when Abe administration was asked whether the Japanese P3C or P1 surveillance flight for dealing with ISR and anti-submarine missions can come to South China Sea to jointly operate with the United States and the Philippines over those. And we actually were very reluctant to do this because of the capacity problem. Well, we have to fly from Okinawa, and then you can just stay for 1 hour, and they have to return. But with having a RAA and allowing the Philippine allows us to be on the place, for example, in the Palawan or any of the EDCA sites, that will really give us another opportunity that the Japan will be joining more firmly into the security of South China Sea. And so this is the kind of range of the opportunity that self-defense was. Of course, we don't really have too much extra capacity, but if we decide to do so, there will be a more opportunity for us to engage in the defense of Philippines and also the peacetime surveillance effort together with the Philippines.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Jimbo. And on that note, we would like to thank our speakers for joining us this morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Jimbo, Mr. Akita, Dr. De Castro, Admiral Ong, and Dr. Kiba. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe
Thank
we'll
you
have
very
a
much.
photo opportunity before we go. And we're not yet done. We still have one more speech to go. And we advise everyone that you stay because Professor Manhit will be disclosing a very important survey result later on. All right, let's give the panel another round of applause, please. And to deliver the closing remarks, and to also share with us the results of the latest social weather station survey regarding the West Philippine Sea, let us all welcome the president of the Stratbase Institute, Professor Dindo Manhit.
Thank you, Joyce. And big thanks to all our speakers. Really deep discussion. And to our participants, our guests, thank you for joining us. You know, the Indo-Pacific stands at a pivotal moment as we navigate a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. Trump 2.0 raises key questions about the future of U.S. engagement in the region. For the Philippines, Japan, and the United States, this is a crucial opportunity to reaffirm our security partnership, strengthen alliances, and uphold the rules-based international order that underpins peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. In today's world, diplomacy is no longer confined to bilateral engagements, but broader alliances and regional partnerships are essential, as each nation brings distinct strengths and perspectives to the table. Trilateral cooperation, in particular, is a strategic approach for countries with shared interests, common security concerns, to collectively address regional challenges. The trilateral collaboration between the Philippines, Japan, and the United States stands as a prime example, with all three nations reaffirming their commitment to a secure and stable Indo-Pacific region. The increasing tensions in the West Philippine Sea, East China Sea, remind us that sovereignty and territorial integrity directly impact the security, economy, and livelihood of our people. The Philippines must continue working closely with Japan and the United States to ensure that international law, particularly the 2016 ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, is respected. During election time, we run surveys month after month to gauge where the Filipino people stands on certain issues. Just a few days back, we spoke of at least 8 out of 10 Filipinos would like to support candidates who will stand up for the sovereignty of the Filipino people. We wanted to add that during the survey, also 77% of Filipinos support strengthening alliances and joint military efforts to defend the Philippines' territorial and economic rights in the West Philippine Sea. It tells us really where we stand as a nation. We know who our friends are. We know that we might be not as strong as we could be, but our strength is with our friends and allies. And that's why we thank the opportunity to have this kind of discussion, the Japan Foundation. Likewise, 78% prefer candidates who will assert the country's sovereignty against China's aggression. I hope we can remind the Filipino people that we lost 6 years. We won something in July 12, 2016, not a piece of paper, but a basis to strengthen our alliances in the name of a rules-based order. And now we have friends, we have a leadership in the case of President Bongbong Marcos who has broadened our partnership and alliances. And can we remind the Filipino people who are these candidates who stood up to undermine Philippine sovereignty, maritime rights. And this is our duty in the ADR Institute, as it was the duty of our late chairman to stand up when nobody believed. Sorry if we tend to be more personal here. Because 6 years, we used personal money of Stratbase to keep this issue alive. And suddenly I see candidates talking about atin ito when I saw them in pictures with Xi Jinping having selfies. The overwhelming support underscores the urgency of reinforcing our defense posture, upholding international law, and collaborating with allies to deter any threats. Filipinos recognize that a firm and united approach through diplomacy, military readiness, and strategic partnership is essential in safeguarding our territorial integrity. The nation stands resolute in defending what is rightfully ours. Japan, the Philippines, and the United States must deepen our strategic collaboration. Again, good morning, and please enjoy lunch that we have prepared. Thank you.